We're a few minutes ahead, which means that we can ask more grilling questions of the next panel, I think, right? Because I'm taking the lead from the Deputy Commissioner. I think she's pointed to Jeff Shuren as the omniscient person that can answer everything that, the audience's questions here, right? And he's looking a little perplexed. No, that's what I got. That was the message I got. Yeah. At any rate, serious note. So we do have a great panel coming up here, and so why don't we go ahead and get started a little bit earlier, because we could end up having a few areas that go over, and of course it gives us a little bit more time for questions during this panel. So I'm going to introduce the panel moderator, and I'll let him introduce the rest of the group. Mike Minogue is the Chief Executive Officer, President, and Chairman of Abiomed, and from my perspective, a very important role as Chairman of MDIC as well. Since joining Abiomed in 2004, Mike changed the corporate strategy and mission to create breakthrough heart support technologies for patients to enable more complete, minimally invasive procedures, heart muscle recovery, and cost-effective patient care. Abiomed was a founding member of MDIC, and Mike has served on the board since our inception. Since February of 2016, Mike has served as chairman of MDIC. Under his guidance and leadership, MDIC has continued to advance our mission of developing innovative tools and methods to accelerate access to new technologies for patients. Please join me in welcoming Mike and the panel to the podium.
Which chair do you want to hear from you, remember?
I don't know.
Yeah, just slide over.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Hi.
Good morning. Any particular order you want? It's mine.
Oh, no.
Jeff sitting on the end.
Keep an eye on the rest of you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
How are you?
Thanks for having me today. We have incredible medical devices, but we still don't have glasses that work where you can read and look out. So I'm going to do my best today to give you an informed panel. So I want to welcome everyone to the MDIC meeting. And I've had the privilege to be the CEO in Abiomed in the space for the last 14 years. I'm also currently the chairman as MDIC, as Bill mentioned. I do not think there has been a better time for collaboration and scientific advancement than there is today in my career in medtech, and it's really a great time. And I want to also acknowledge what I consider to be the secret sauce of the industry, which is we have the best hospitals, we have the best physicians, we have the best nurses, caregivers, and administrators in the world. And for someone who travels around the world, there is a lot of criticism of different systems, but I think from an industry perspective, we're all confident that our caregivers are the best in the world. And it's also a credit to both the FDA and CMS that they allow for an industry and an environment where you have safe and effective and where you have reasonable and necessary. So I want to thank them for all the work they do. So today we have an incredible panel, and I want to just give a brief introduction and then we'll get into the questions. First is Dr. Jeff Shuren. Dr. Shuren is director of CDRH at the FDA and was co-founder of MDIC. He has an incredible impact on innovation and patient engagement. Jeff's leadership, along with MDIC, is creating a new science around regulatory science and bringing the patient voice into the process. This mindset has contributed to what many in the industry would say is the best of times for patients, for innovation, and for scientific collaboration. With big priorities like early feasibility studies, NEST, real-world evidence, and patient input, U.S. patients are gaining earlier access to life-changing technology today. What people may not realize about Jeff is that he has a very good sense of humor, and in my opinion is one of the most qualified directors because he is a physician, he's a lawyer, and he has extensive experience at CMS. So welcome, Jeff. Our next panel member is Scott Whitaker, seated to my left here, President and CEO of AdvaMed. He has positively impacted both the vision and the strategy of the whole industry. He is completely engaged and focused on bringing a partnership approach to all the stakeholders engaged in healthcare, from the political process, which we know is very important, to the innovators, to the regulators, to the payers, and always for the ultimate benefit of the patient. Scott has also shown himself to be an exceptional leader. With a vast network and truly engaged MDIC in the process, he saw it as a collaborative approach to extend the advancement in helping patients achieve access to new technology. What people may not realize about Scott is that he has a sincere purpose around advancing patient care, and he also manages the multiple challenges and many CEOs of the medtech industry, always with a smile and a plan. So we're welcome to have him leading our industry association. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Mike.
To my left is Mark Leahey, CEO of MDMA. And Mark has been a key driver for our entire industry and subject matter expert on everything from user fees to CMS payment rules to the regulatory process. Mark is a trusted champion for small companies and VC firms, and he is respected for his execution in the space. Mark has also been an early supporter of MDIC and is actually the one who helped recruit me initially as a founding member company. What people may not know about Mark is that he is also a lawyer, but can give a concise answer.
I will try.
And operationally drive execution and positive results. So we're glad to have Mark here today and get his insight. And last is Kim McCleary, Acting Executive Director and Managing Director of FasterCures, a think tank focused on speeding up and improving the medical research system. At FasterCures, they say that they are saving lives by saving time. Among other initiatives, she is currently working to advance the science of patient input, an initiative that bridges the efforts to expand opportunities for patient perspectives and experience to shape and influence the delivery of medical products. What people may not know about Kim is that I do not know her yet, but she has an impressive background around patient advocacy, and we're looking forward to hearing her insight today. So thank you. Now for the discussion. And I'd ask that we keep the answers somewhat brief to cover a broad range. And if people have questions, if they would potentially go to the microphones, and we will go, as the panel goes on, we'll take questions as we proceed. So the first question is for Dr. Shuren. What is an FDA goal that MDIC can support and help succeed?
Well, I'd like to see further advancement in terms of incorporating the perspective of patients throughout the total product life cycle. And I think MDIC has done a terrific job in putting out their framework, as well as a compendium of methodologies and tools that can be used for assessing patient perspectives, patient preferences. And now it's sort of taking it further. You heard from Deputy Commissioner Abram that next week, the very first meeting of the Patient Engagement Advisory Committee is going to kick off with doing a deeper dive on how we incorporate perspective of patients, clinical trials, design clinical trials around them, measure what matters to them. And I'd love to see MDIC sort of take the ball in a complementary way and advance that activity.
Would you comment how the early feasibility studies can also play a role in patient access?
So typically, product developers bring their technologies to those countries where they start to study it early. And so if we see more early feasibility studies here in the US, that's an early entry point for bringing technologies here early, because you keep going back to the same clinicians. So I think it's been tremendous, and another great example of where FDA and MDIC doing complementary work. Some of the changes in our policy and our processes combined with the work of MDIC has now been leading to a steady increase in the conduct of early feasibility studies here in the US, both increase in number and starting them earlier in device development.
Great. Thank you. Scott, next question to you. What is an AdvaMed goal that MDIC can support and help succeed?
Yeah, so great question, Mike. Before I start, thank you for your leadership of MDIC. I think you mentioned the progress that we've made over the past few years, and it's sort of a golden era, and a lot of that is due to your leadership and Jeff, the changes he's made at FDA. So I agree with you. We're in a great place right now. I think if you look at our priorities. There's the regulatory priorities, which we've talked about. We've made so much progress in that in the last 3 or 4 years. The biggest issue, I think, for us going forward is making progress on the payer side as well. And 5 years ago, you would find some that criticized the FDA for slowness, lack of transparency, and that type of thing. That's not the case today, thanks in large part, Jeff, to the work that you've done. And this is not a criticism of CMS, it's just that we're not quite there yet on the payer side. And I think if you can use the process of MDIC to help support improved policies on the payer side, it would be a huge benefit to the entire industry going forward.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, and I think to build off what Scott said first, I'm glad that I was successful in convincing you to plant your flag here, because I think even in the early days we knew, you know, Jeff, this was a vision that you had, and people who know me tell, you know, I can be a glass half full type of person, but I think it was eyes wide open, and to see really the fruits of the labor that have resulted is really been great to see, and credit to you, to Jeff, and really the patients are the ones benefiting. I think to build off Scott, and there's a session this afternoon that I'm very interested about, is just making the generation of evidence more innovative and efficient. I mean, that is the key opportunity here, and as a company or an association that represents many small companies that are venture-backed, and you just have to look at the data to look at the significant drop in early-stage financing for small companies, they can no longer afford to kind of take this sequential approach to getting through the FDA, generating that evidence, and then, you know, having that milestone and then raising another round to generate and hit the target for you know, coverage and payment issues. And so I think, you know, whether it be early feasibility, the fact that these companies can actually, you know, drive down the street or fly domestically to check on sites is a huge opportunity for that feedback loop to be accelerated and move things forward. And I think also with Chip Hance's work, both at FDA and now in the private sector, and the fact that Naomi Orenson's here from Blue Cross Blue Shield, I mean, that is, I think, in large part, the efficiency that we've seen at FDA has exacerbated that gap between regulatory and reimbursement. If we can get our arms collectively together here to do this, and again, MDIC is uniquely situated, well more so than AdvaMed or MDA or FDA, because you have FDA, you have CMS, you have NIH, you have patients, and you have innovators. So I think the ingredients are there. We just need to find the right recipe to succeed.
Right. Thank you, Mark. So, Kim, what is a faster goals cure and goal that MDIC can help succeed? And maybe you can give us a little bit of your journey and background as well.
Sure. So I've spent more than 25 years in sort of the patient advocacy space, first with a disease-based nonprofit, working to better research a particularly stigmatizing condition called chronic fatigue syndrome or myalgic encephalomyelitis. And that opportunity really framed the work that I'm doing now with FasterCures, where we kind of are a bridge within the system, as he said in the introduction. We work across diseases with all of the stakeholders in the ecosystem to identify and then break down issues that cause, that add time and expense to the process of getting promising medical innovation from the lab or the bench to patients. And we see this whole movement that Jeff spoke to and that we have heard about already this morning of this science of patient input as really being an innovation that will sort of bridge the gap between the products that are developed and the products that patients really need, want, and expect that will improve their health outcomes. And MDIC and FDA, in particular CDRH, have been a tremendous partner in this effort. And through the work of MDIC, the work that Jeff mentioned in creating the framework for how patient preferences can be integrated across the total product life cycle, and the catalog of methods, and there are about I've mapped more than 80 collaborative efforts going on across the whole healthcare ecosystem to create tools and resources to really foster this and get us past the question of why would we want to do this to the how we would want to do this. And I think the next stage of work that MDIC and we together with FDA really have to sink our teeth into is driving adoption. I think we're going from really sort of the aspirational goal of this to really the application of it and to understanding how it can make a difference in quelling some of the uncertainty that we heard about in the last session that really kind of chills activity. And you know, it's going to introduce some new uncertainty in a way, but maybe potentially we think the products will be better coming out the end and more profitable to the companies making them and more satisfactory to the patients using them.
Thank you. So this is a question to all, and I'll go down the line, but there's FDA, CMS, MDMA, MFA, there's all kinds of letters, and so as a result, there's still a lot of confusion about what MDIC is. And so as interested parties, it would be great to get kind of your elevator pitch of how you would explain MDIC to someone about the function and the role. So Mark, I'll start with you.
Sure. Again, I think I kind of framed it at the beginning. I think it's the only private-public partnership I'm aware of that has all the key, you know, from the innovators, from the investors, most importantly, the patients, the regulators, the payers, all coming together. And as I mentioned, you know, this oftentimes is an ebb and a flow between collaboration, confrontation. I think we're in this unique period of time now where everyone understands the challenges are great. If we're trying to get our arms around bending the cost curve here, it's the, you know, 75% of the spend is spent on chronic management, you know, a chronic disease. And, you know, much of that, I think the people on this, you know, stage and also in the room here have the opportunity to develop cures and treatments to bend that cost curve. But, you know, time's ticking here, and you look at the demographics and the patient population, if we don't accelerate innovation and bring these products to market more quickly and ultimately, again, have these pieces put in place, this cost curve is going to continue to escalate. So I think it's that unique recipe of all the key stakeholders here. And I think everyone does a nice job, too, of kind of taking on their perspective, certainly representing their interests, but recognizing that it's not a zero-sum game here. We all have to work together, ultimately, for the patients to benefit.
If I could just add, I think one of the unique things about MDIC has been the opportunity to bring these different parties together, as you've just said, and really to create something different. I mean, I'm seeing in a lot of the initiatives where the sectors are coming together to solve a common problem, there are these emergent properties, you know, almost, where this, what is that phrase? The sum of the parts is greater than the whole. It's like baking a cake. I mean, once you put all the ingredients together and put it in the oven, you don't taste the egg, you don't taste the sugar, you don't taste the baking powder. There's something completely new and different created out of that process. And I feel like that's what MDIC and the power of public-private partnerships really brings to bear, is a different product than you would have had if you each went about it separately.
So Mike, I think my elevator pitch is it's a public-private partnership to help bring life-changing technologies to patients in need. That kind of summarizes it right there. And what we've seen, I think, from the work we've done over the past few years is that patients are getting access to technologies quicker than they have in the past 5 years, faster than I can remember recently. And it's changing people's lives in a way that unless you experience it personally, you don't fully understand. But when you live it every day, I live it every day with a daughter who has type 1 diabetes, and you see the evolution of technology, the speed with which FDA is now looking and understanding at those technologies and then making decisions to get them into the system, the healthcare system, that's the value of public-private partnerships, and that's the value, I think, of what MDIC brings to the equation right now.
Yeah, so I think everything that needs to be said has been said. But just to build off, it's also the problem that this public-private partnership is solving, because we have some of the most innovative companies on the planet are here for the US. But that technology isn't going to get to patients unless you've got the evidence to support it getting to market and getting it reimbursed. And MDIC is really the game in town that collaboratively we're solving those challenges of how do you develop that evidence, but you do it in a timely manner, a cost-efficient manner. And that's the difference between technology dying versus getting it to patients quickly.
Great. Maybe a regulatory and public policy question for both Mark and Scott is, we have the collaboration, we have this public-private partnership, but would you all comment on if we're on the right track for public policy relative to innovation, and maybe some suggestions or things that you are most focused on? Scott, we'll start with you.
So I think on the regulatory side, I said this earlier, I think on the regulatory side we are on the right track, and we've made tons of progress. You look at 21st Century Cures and some of the provisions that were in there, that are much better for the patients and also for the industry, brings tremendous clarity and transparency to the process. You look at the agreement we negotiated, Mark and I and Jeff, on Medufa this time around, a very strong agreement focused on bringing products to patients more quickly in a fair and transparent process. Tremendous progress has been made on the public policy regulatory front. I think on the payment side, there's still a lot of progress we can make. I'll just give you one example. In 21st Century Cures, we had the breakthrough pathways, but it was focused on FDA. Pardon me. There's not a similar pathway now at CMS to get those into the healthcare system as quickly. So FDA will go through a quick and smart process to get a product approved that's a breakthrough technology, and then it will sit for months, if not years, before somehow CMS will take that up. There's a way to deal with that, right, which is a legislative proposal we have. We've been working on it with Mark as well, breakthrough pathways for devices to be paid for, which is essentially to say, give them a temporary code, allow that temporary code to exist for 3 years, and during that 3-year period, let's build the evidence for a full code that can be paid for over the long term. That gets the product into patients, it gets the product into the system, it lets us to begin to build evidence, and that's the type of collaboration I think we need going forward on the payment side. There's a lot of other payment reforms, and I'm sure Mark will talk about those as well, but that's one of the ones that I think we should really be focused on in the next year.
Yeah,
Mark?
and again, I'd start with just, again, with that scarcity of capital, the most impactful in the short term here is for Congress to finally recognize, particularly with overwhelming bipartisan support, getting rid of a tax on life-saving products is not a good policy, and it takes $2 billion out of the system. So hopefully that's something we get clarity on the short term and give businesses, innovators some certainty there. I think to build off what Scott said, regulatory, particularly on the pre-market side, is trending in the right directions. We just want to continue to accelerate those trend lines. I think some of the uncertainty and that risk-based approach and more predictability on the post-market side related to inspections and recalls, there's been a lot of great work by CDRH, FDA, AMI, AdvaMed, MDMA on that front, so that's another area of opportunity for improvement. And then just to build off, the key issue, though, is just the ongoing uncertainty with the payment coverage and coding issues. And unlike FDA, where the reforms where we have kind of a single entity there, I mean, this is a much more complex issue. You have CMS at the national level, you have the local MACs, and you have the private payers. And so I think one opportunity here, and I'm not suggesting that they all be merged into one, but again, is there ability for all the stakeholders to come together on a framework of developing high quality evidence, and also maybe in a tiered approach? I mean, one of the things that Tamara Sarek-Jensen, I know, is actively involved in MDIC, and again, something that we've been working with AdvaMed on, and Jeff's been talking about this as well, is can you move toward perhaps some sort of provisional coverage, maybe with the local MACs, to allow for certain patients to be treated while that evidence is being generated? Again, for a small company where you have a zero-sum game here, it's very hard to have the resources to continue to plow in and generate enough evidence for a national coverage determination. So what can we do to make this right size so you have kind of maybe a gated approach here, appropriately, not restrictive, but just have some mechanism where coverage technologies can be covered, a revenue stream can be generated, realizing there needs to be a cap, but so that revenue stream can populate and push out more evidence. And then the final thing I'll say is, when you look at the private insurance industry out there, and again, I'm pleased that Naomi's here. She's doing a lot of good work with Excite International and others. But there needs to be more I mean, when our members talk to private payers, they love to say, you're not there yet, you haven't hit the mark. But there's no explanation of where they fell short and why private payers can't be more transparent and put their coverage decisions publicly available, positive and negative, so just like FDA does, so that if you're in the queue, okay, here is the trial that was structured, here is the target where we're successful, here's what fell short. Mechanisms, some private payers are very good meeting with early stage companies and others early in the process. Others say, don't come talk to us until you have regulatory approval. I mean, there's got to be a mechanism here. We take the best practices and put them into some sort of mechanism whereby all the private payers, all the innovators, we're all working on behalf of the patient. Let's make sure we have a transparent, predictable pathway here. Again, they can all deliver it the way they want, but I think this is an opportunity for MDIC to create that framework here so there's greater clarity.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, so this question is for Kim. Kim, at FasterCures, you got engaged with MDIC early on, and you have a unique perspective because you're not just dealing with devices, you're dealing across the ecosystem of healthcare. but you also were very actively engaged in our patient-centered benefit risk project. And for those people here that maybe aren't as familiar with MDIC and how that engagement process worked, maybe you could compare and contrast how your experience on that program and how it went versus some of the other experiences you've had in public-private partnerships, and maybe at the end suggest where we could improve or what we could also do to change for the future.
Sure, thanks, Bill. So what I found really unique and refreshing about the process that the patient-centered benefit risk group took on was having kind of a ready customer in CDRH for that work, and their partnership all the way through from the earliest conversations about how can we focus this maybe around patient preference and really digging into that subject matter, bringing experts from health economics and the device industry and patient organizations all together around the table with the regulators to really understand what are the needs of each different party going through. And then to in a very ambitious and sometimes felt aggressive timetable to develop something that would be immediately useful once we put it into the field. And on a parallel path, it was really cool to know that on the other side of the curtain, CDRH was working just as ambitiously and aggressively to be able to pair that framework and the catalog with a guidance document, and have to have had, what was it, May 14th, 2014, a day will go down in infamy for many of us, of having that set of tools from MDIC and all of us collectively, and then to have the CDRH draft guidance and Commissioner Califf there, and to have really this total package, if you will, of resources that could immediately be used and put into practice by the device manufacturers, and for the patient organizations and the patient advocates to know, hey, we've got to come up to speed on this. We have to become somewhat experts in this new science of how to do these preference studies. And I think what we're struggling with a little bit is the workforce around that. There aren't that many teams available to do these types of health economics-based marketing type studies to really understand patient preferences. And I think the workforce issue is one that we'll have to get our arms around, maybe in a similar way in terms of future challenges that we will need to come together and kind of figure out, where does that expertise come from? Can we borrow from outcomes research? Can we borrow from other fields to create kind of a new set of people that have these tools available to them and start to put them into practice in better understanding how patient preferences should drive the attributes of new medical devices and how they get used and implemented in once they're available in healthcare.
And if I could just comment, I think this actually goes back to Jeff, kind of the evolution. I think you talk often about the kind of the changing culture as well. And I think, this is back 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, and I think you and Chip Hans worked on this benefit risk kind of framework. And again, changing it from risk benefit to benefit risk. And I was struck by, and again, I think this was the seed in which we're seeing it blossom now, a recognition that, a reviewer at White Oak, to put them in a position where they're drawing the line, saying, okay, above this, then the patient should have access, below this, they shouldn't, without they themselves being in that position where they or their loved one are needing something, and actually kind of expanding that range of acceptability, and then making sure all the information is out there for the patient, the clinician, their family to make that determination. I think that's one of the most significant changes in mindset that occurred, and now we're seeing that kind of the next generation with this patient engagement. So again, I think it demonstrates too that this is kind of a brick by brick approach. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think the seeds have been planted, and if we can just accelerate that, I'm hoping version 3.0 will be that much more impactful.
And I think the baking in of, now that we have these preference tools, like with the obesity device, is how do you translate that into a shared decision-making tool that can be used at the bedside or in the doctor's office for the patient to understand, here's my risk tolerance, these are the benefits I expect, and these are the choices that fit within that range of options.
Great. So Jeff, what would you define as your vision for Nest over the next 3 years, and how would you define success? And then after that, I'd love to get feedback from the rest of the panel of your opinion of Nest and how it can also enhance what you're doing as well.
So in the next 3 years, well, I'll say in the next 2 years, the end of calendar year 2019, we have to have, that's our goal, if you will, Nest 1.0, that we do have the rudimentary system. And so what is success looking like at that point and the year afterwards? That Nest can be leveraged for both pre-market and post-market purposes, that it can be used for a variety of technologies that are both high-risk PMA, the de novos, and 510Ks, and it has a sustainable business model. That's what we're looking for as success, and that's what we expect to see in that time frame.
Great.
I guess I would respond, we would look for Jeff to be successful there. Because if Jeff is successful in getting where he wants to be, I think the industry benefits from it. And a simple answer, that's where we would like to be as well.
I'd say I think it's exciting because it builds on some of the other data infrastructure that our country has made an investment in, including PCORNet through the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute and the Sentinel system on the CDR side of FDA. And I think the greater ability to gather evidence from new places is really going to enhance decision-making at all levels, not just in the regulatory sense, but ultimately at the bedside and in a shared decision-making sense for patients and their providers to really have more at their fingertips that they can use to make the judgments that translate into better care.
And obviously, we're optimistic here. I don't think industry would have invested the significant resources, $30 million, if we didn't think there'd be some benefit. Obviously, I think there are other opportunities for Congress or others to step in. For the industry's investment, it was focused on accelerating the pre-market review and patient access. So I think seeing some opportunities there where because of the infrastructure of Nest that it allowed companies in a more cost-effective way to bring these products to market is certainly something we're looking towards as a marker of success. And then also and again, this from the perspective of small companies, but I think large companies face this as well, kind of the different silos of evidence generation that exists out there. And one in particular is just, with a lot of these registries and the specialty societies, kind of these fiefdoms out there where they want to control the data, and quite frankly, they can charge a significant cost for companies to participate in those registries. And I think one of the great selling features, at least to our members, was the fact that this provided them kind of more of an open platform and a level of the playing field so that there would be kind of this, instead of the siloed approach to evidence generation, it would be aggregating larger data sets and also maybe providing new opportunities that were much more cost effective. So I think that's the opportunity here, and then recognizing that Rome wasn't built in a day, but how that data would then be leveraged by CMS, by private payers, by the local MECs to narrow that gap between regulatory and reimbursement. I think those are the things that maybe we can't do in the next 2 to 3 years, but certainly some of those things, if you're putting up milestones, can be achieved in the next 2 years. I think over the next 3 to 5, they're certainly reasonable if all the parties come together.
Great. So if FDA validates safe and effective, and if CMS validates reasonable and necessary, what would you say MDIC validates or should validate? Start with you, Jeff.
I think MDIC can play a critical role in helping to validate the tools, then support decisions that a device is safe and effective and reasonable and necessary.
Great.
So that's the right answer. What I would add is we would hope that MDIC would help validate the fact that safe and effective and reasonable and necessary are standards that are good for the patients who are waiting for these next round of technologies to get to them, right? At the end of the day, everything we do is about people who are suffering, right? Every technology we create is to try to help people extend or save their lives. And if the processes that are put in place at the end of the day are focused on the patients, they're probably going to be right. I revert back to the earlier conversation about payer policy, and Jeff has made tremendous changes at FDA in the culture and the way the culture works. If you think about it on the payer side, just take CMS for example. Historically, it's been a very budget-centric approach to every decision that is made. How much does it cost? Can we afford it? And then we will or will not cover it, right? It feels to me like going forward in this new era where there's some evidence collection that goes on, that there's a very strong regulatory system in place as well, that the focus ought to shift more to what's in the best interest of the patients who are trying to get access to these products. And that should be just as much, if not more of a focus on payer policy and reimbursement policy than it is today. And that's the way to sort of take it, I think, to the next level of patient care.
I would add that, I mean, we use these terms safe and effective, and from the patient side of things, it's easy to think those are absolutes, that there's a singular definition of what is safe and what is effective. And I think we're moving to a space, particularly with the work that's been done on patient-centered benefit risk assessment and the agency's kind of recognition that the patient's view of what is safe and what is effective might be very different than the traditional regulatory view that was quite paternalistic, and the doctor's view that was also fairly paternalistic. I mean, we've heard the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research has now conducted about 24 patient-focused drug development meetings where this topic has come, into clear view that patients are, depending on their condition, may be willing to tolerate a different level of risk than was recognized in the past, that their expectations around what is effective might be based on a different set of outcomes than the developer has used. And therefore, you've got this mismatch potentially both at the point of regulatory review and then also once you get into the marketplace. If the device or the drug doesn't meet what the patient cares about most in terms of outcomes, is that really effective? It might do what the clinical trial set out to do, but doesn't meet a patient need. So I think MDIC has a role in helping shape this new conversation about how those terms safe and effective are really translated into the innovation cycle, into the regulatory decision making, and then into healthcare.
I couldn't have said it better. I think it's certainly the tools, but it's really that conversation, and maybe you have different tools that can be developed along the way. As I said, that kind of staged approach, because I think and this is another area where I think FDA has excelled in dealing with technologies in which there's an unmet clinical need, and how do you bring these products to the market more quickly, because again, these are folks with no other options. Unfortunately, we have situations talking with private payers particularly where they'll get up on the stage and they'll say, we don't care if there's an unmet clinical need. Here's our bar for evidence, and we're not moving it. This is where it is, and basically no appreciation to that beneficiary. And we understand that they have actuary tables and they've got to be profitable, et cetera. But again, we're not talking about open the barn doors for 50 technologies a year. But if there are technologies out there that show great promise and there's no other option for these patients, the fact that there's no flexibility here just seems unreasonable. And we're not suggesting, again, I think this is where the industry needs to step up as well. And we have to say at the outset, listen, we are willing to put some cap on the patients, or that the cohort of the patient population this will serve. But for this whole chicken or egg situation to continue going on, where so much progress is made on the regulatory standpoint, I mean, we've got to reconcile those two positions if we really want patients to be getting access to the technologies they need.
So a couple more questions. We have a question, Susan.
Yes, hi, Susan Albert. I'm a consultant to the industry. I actually have a question that starts with Jeff, but actually goes to the whole panel. And that is, with the new changes that you're making at CDRH for total product life cycle and changing the way that we're going to be interacting with the staff, the question that I have is, first of all, can you, as we started earlier today, can you give us a little more clarity on what that intent is and what we're going to see for that? And then I think a question for how the industry can help, how the people in this room in MDIC can help with that transition and understand how to interface in very productive ways, because the changes that are happening that the panel's already been talking about in terms of engagement of patients and a different way of looking at benefit risk, and then having change in the agency, in the way that the structure works, coming at the same time. How do we help?
And in 1 minute or less.
In 30 seconds,
In
Jeff.
30 seconds. So the total product life cycle, approach is nothing new. Within our ecosystem, it's nothing new for the center. But we were not organizationally set up to support that model optimally, at least for a large part of the center. And as a result, that when our activities, when we have to share information between offices, sometimes not all the information is going in an efficient or timely manner. When there are handoffs between offices, there can be challenges. Our workload, because of the way we're structured, very hierarchical, of the branch, division, office, that as we see evolving technology, our structure does not adapt quickly to it. It's very hard to do a reorganization. And then there's a whole nother component to this, which is our investment in our own staff. That we became so focused on meeting our time frames and all our other commitments, the people we kind of forget about is our own people. So the TPLC office does three things. Brings together office compliance or office surveillance and biometrics, office of device evaluation, essentially puts them in a fusion generator to create an entirely new office, not one absorbing the other, but all together in a new mix. And all of those activities around the total product life cycle, they're there. The second is we're moving away from the branch model. Everything is based upon team. People are in teams. They may even have their major and minor. They spend most of their time in one area. They spend part of their time in others. It will give us a better opportunity for our experts to engage and not just simply get information by asking for a written consult, but an ongoing dialogue. And then two, as our workload changes, it's easier for us to adapt that on a team approach, which I'm not stuck with a rigid branch structure. And our management gets flattened into a team approach as well. And you'll see some other innovations in the kinds of offices we do around clinical evidence, and happy to talk about that further another time. And the last is we're separating out our responsibilities of our managers. Our scientific, technical, and clinical experts should be focused on moving the freight, if you will, and get them involved in the tougher decisions. A lot of the other more traditional management responsibilities like training, all the things on professional development, training, evaluation, and even on the workload, better window across the office, we're moving off to a new cadre of managers, essentially are focused on our staff. So free up the technical experts so they don't wear so many hats, they're more effective at what they need to do, and a better investment at our own staff.
Was the extra question was, what can we do to support that?
Notice I sidestepped that.
Yeah. Well, I would say two things. One, you can see from the way Jeff articulated his vision for CDRH that we're on a different path than we've been in the past. So we recognize and appreciate that. What can we do? Well, we've done one big thing, and that's increased the user fee support to CDRH about 35% over what it was the previous 5 years. That's a significant resource allocation for our companies to FDA to help support where Jeff's trying to go with the center. The second thing we can do, as Jeff reorganizes his staff, we can do a better job, I'm sure, all of us, in providing the information that they need from us to help us get to a decision more quickly and in a more comprehensive manner. And I think to some degree that's on companies to comply with that. As Jeff's trying to reorganize and improve CDRH, it's on us to help support that financially and then provide the information they need so we can get to decisions quickly.
Yeah, I would say, and to build off what Jeff said about kind of allocating resources efficiently as well, I think one of the programs that MDIC is working on, and a priority for FDA as well, is this case for quality. And Robin Newman's been out there talking about this. A lot of stakeholders, Sean Boyd and Cisco, just held a webinar with our folks last week, and I think this is a great opportunity here. And again, it's been discussed for many, probably 4 or 5 years now, but I think for the first time, I'll say our members feel like, okay, given this collaborative spirit here, if companies can demonstrate that they have a rigorous quality system in place and sharing information more regularly with FDA, does that allow FDA and their team to feel more confident saying, okay, these are folks that have the system in place, they're interactive, we can put them, they have a different risk profile. And so, whether it be submissions or changes they want to make, where they are in the queue related to inspections. Again, I think this is something that is a welcomed opportunity here, and that mindset and that collaboration. Again, no one's suggesting that there are any shortcuts here. Don't be mistaken. This, again, is an opportunity here where I think FDA is putting out some additional carrots there for companies that demonstrate they have a quality system that is high functioning, and in exchange allow companies to bring products to market maybe in a little bit more flexible way. And ultimately, that just allows you all to spend your resources and put them in a more targeted manner to help address any issues that may. So I think, again, that's another initiative. And what I kind of love about MDIC is they don't try to boil the ocean as well. The initiatives you're working on are absolutely kind of the key choke points for innovative medical device companies out there. Again, none of the folks that we usually interact with are kind of these Me Too folks. I mean, if you're a Me Too company, you don't have issues in Washington that will have you engaged. But if you truly are disrupting healthcare, going out into that white space and trying to move the needle from a patient care perspective, by definition, the rules of the road may not be able to fit neatly within you. And so I think, again, this is another area where I know FDA has prioritized. MDIC, AdvaMed, and MDMA are working together on this, and hopefully we can all get to a place where the prospects and the intended benefits are actually realized in a short period of time.
Great. So I'm going to be respectful of the time. We started a little early. I'm going to have one more question for all of you. But first, to just summarize, we covered the importance of the programs, the patient perspective. If you're not aware of early feasibility studies, it's a great goal that Dr. Shuren established for the FDA to bring technology here earlier for our researchers. That enhances our collaboration and trust within the agencies. Dr. Bram Zuckerman is in the audience, who's done a lot of work on establishing faster paths for IRB, establishing standards for hospitals to understand what FDA audits and FDA definitions are about. We've talked about NEST real-world evidence in the Q&A with the Deputy Secretary. She talked about the benefits of computer simulation, things that we're doing with virtual patients. So all tools to advance regulatory science. So with that, in conclusion, we have a lot of people in the audience. They have a lot of different perspectives. And you all are the experts in your space and your viewpoint. Could you give the audience one specific thing that you think is the most important thing to drive success based on your perspective, and where the entire field is going to go around collaboration and scientific advancement? So, Dr. Shuren, I'll start with you.
All right, the most important thing. So I'll give a CDRH centric. So we are on a journey, and we have been trying to change our role as regulator from the very traditional command and control if you will, gatekeeper, to much more the collaborative gateway. And so we see one of the secret sauce, if you will, and the thing that we're very highly focused on is creating what we call collaborative communities, essentially bringing together the key stakeholder groups in a community in an ongoing venue to continue to solve both shared problems and unique problems. And I think MDIC and some of the work under it, like what's starting with Case for Quality and NEST, are sort of nascent efforts of setting up those collaborative communities that essentially, it's not government going off on its own together, but true representative government is about working directly with all of the stakeholders to solve problems together.
Thank you.
So I would play off what Jeff said and say I think one of, if not the most important thing, is to take advantage of the collaborative gateway that Jeff described and move toward payment policies that are more patient-focused rather than budget-focused. And if we can get there, I think not only is the industry better for it, patients are better served for it, and I think the healthcare system benefits from it more broadly as well. So I would say that's where we need to go.
Thanks, Scott.
My one thing would be to really align around the patient view of unmet medical need. For whatever your product is trying to accomplish, if it doesn't meet something that the patients care about, I think increasingly what Jeff has done is expose his staff and his collaborative teams to that idea about what are patients looking for through making it one of the 3 strategic goals and having such a high bar for the CDRH staff to interact directly with patients. If they have that knowledge and you're not taking the time to accumulate it as you make your product and it comes through the total product life cycle, it may not have value at the end and payers may not be willing to pay for it. So to me, that's kind of, sort of becomes a new bedrock for how we collaboratively work together to create medical products that really meet the unmet medical needs as patients define them, not as maybe our cool science might want to define them.
Right. And I would just add, I think, not only the collaboration, but flexibility, because I think, the reality is right now with certain technologies, as you said, about the focus on cost, if a payer can't realize that savings while that patient is within their system, actuarially, they're going to make it very hard to cover. Now, people out there talking about population management, population health, it's a great thing. We're aspiring to get there. We're not there yet. And so in that period of time from where we are right now to where we get to truly populational health, when the incentives will truly be aligned to make that investment in new technology, even if that benefit accrues while that patient is on someone else's plan, again, that's the gap we're trying to bridge right now. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity for people to be flexible and also maybe that appreciation that don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. We're getting close to population management so we can have these tools that, again, as long as the data and the evidence is there to show that there's benefit, but sometimes that benefit can actually be 2 years, 3 years down the road. And unfortunately with CMS and a lot of these value programs out there, the longest lookout they have 30, 60, 90 days after hospitalization. And that's not doing any patient any good when some of these benefits, again, and these technologies and therapies have that benefit outside that window. So I think that's an opportunity where everyone can put their foot forward and again, even those who may not benefit right now, the payers who may have to take a little bit of a hit, but in order to get where we all need to go, there has to be flexibility there.
Great. So I'll close with my one thing would be to get involved in MDIC. And because as all of the groups are successful, we can make technology that can help patients all over the world, and that is the secret sauce of the entire space. So thanks for your time, and I'd welcome all of you to talk to our panel members after the end of the break. Thank you.
And I would like to, so thank you all to the panel members as well. It is break time. We are ahead of schedule about 15 minutes, so we'll still take a 20-minute break and come back 20 minutes from now. So that's about 20 minutes to the hour. Thank you.